Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. So this is a talk by Antitled Chapter. So we've got this talk's on exploring gender biases in the OR and analytics professions with systems thinking. So the way this is going to run today, so we've got just a bit of a welcome and introduction to Warren. So many of you may already know about Warren, or this might be your first event, so it's great to see you all. And then we'll have the talk from Antitled, and then following that, so I'll go for around 40 minutes. Following that, we'll have some questions, and then wrap this up, and we'll be aiming to finish at 2:30. Okay, so like I say, welcome to everyone from Warren. So if you don't know us, we're the Women in OR and Analytics Network. So we have some wonderful sponsors from many universities, different companies as well, and the Operational Research Society supports us very well. And so we're here just to really promote, I guess, and really discuss the issues affecting women in OR and analytics professions. And in this particular case, what Antitled will be talking about is in the gender biases. And so we also we run many different events to try and bring people together and build this community. And so many events like having speakers like Antitled, and running like different lightning talks, have some more outreach activities, and even things like running Wikipedia, wikithons for writing Wikipedia pages. So there's many different things that we have going. Just have a look at the website to see what's happening at the moment. Okay, so before we get started, we just wanted to get a bit of an idea on who, I guess, our audience. So we're going to run a couple of polls. So a couple of questions in this poll. So we've got 4 questions. So the first one is, where do you work? Like whether it's at university or in industry, mix both. So in what stage you're at, and then the other ones. So then we've also got some questions about this actual this topic. And so these 2 questions are, we have, do you think the OR community has a gender bias? So this yes or no. And then the second one, slightly different. So if you think there is a gender bias, is this something that needs to be addressed? Like, so, may feel like that it's okay, or maybe things something we can't do anything about. So just slightly different question. Okay, so it looks like we've got generally a good mix, mostly university, and quite a broad range. So I might, so we've got most people there. So have I finished the poll yet? Is that? There you go. Good. Okay. So yeah, so we've got a nice range of people there with like different backgrounds and ranging different parts of their career. So that's quite good. And so yeah, so and I guess we'll see that there is a gender bias, and there is some, I guess we'll see whether about the needs to address that. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. And so now it's time to hand over to Antitled, but before we get there, just like to introduce Dr. Taco. So Dr. Taco is a reader in operational research at the School of Business and Economics at Loughborough University. And so Dr. Taco is an expert in qualitative and quantitative approaches, so with a bit of a focus on healthcare. And so there's interest in, so Dr. Taco has interest in simulation modeling, behavioral operational research, and problem structuring methods, and has been a recipient of the OR Society's President Medal. So that's about this topic. So the OR Society's membership has this split of about 1/3 women and 2/3 men. So there's clearly I guess a gender bias there, or the balance is slightly off, and so there's going to be some impacts there to women and their career progressions. And so this talk is to discuss what are those barriers and enablers of gender biases that are affecting women's careers in OR the analytics profession. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Taco now to talk us through this topic, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about this. So thank you very much.
I was muted. Thank you, Stephen, for the nice introduction. And hi to everyone. Thank you for coming to this presentation today. So like Stephen mentioned, this is a project that we undertook here at Loughborough University last summer. It was part of an MSc project, and the title is about really exploring and trying to understand gender bias and how does that affect the OR and analytics, people in OR and analytics professions. This was the reason why this is a special project, I will say, because the reason that we are presenting this as well is because this was a Warren-sponsored project. I was, as a member of the Warren committee, I'm actually a member of the mentoring committee. I wanted to look at this topic. So I was the initiator, if you like, of this project. And the student that worked on it was Olufoyinsola Fagbemi, who was studying for an MSc in Logistics and Supply Chain Management here at Loughborough last year. She has currently finished her studies, and her supervisor was Brian Dangerfield, who, as many of you may know, is a very well-known expert in system dynamics. So we created a really nice team between us, and you probably will notice the diversity of the team, and probably also my interest in involving of men as well as females in analyzing and talking about gender bias is quite an important element. So this is my introduction to the topic of what we're talking today. As an outline of what I will take us through is, first I'll look at motivation, what got me started. Then I'll speak a bit more about the project, the aims and the methods that were used in the project. There's a questionnaire survey that will show you some of the results, and then we'll finally present the system maps that were created. And finally, we'll wrap up with some recommendations that we think were quite nicely highlighted from this project. So in terms of motivation, how it got us started, it was about 2 years ago when I found a bit of time in the springtime, it was 2020, and I really was very interested and read the book by Carolyn Criado Perez, Invisible Women, which really gave me that motivation to say, oh, there's lots of issues that we women in the society are probably faced with that we don't always become aware. So what really is interesting about this book is that it exposes the biases that exist in our everyday life through data. So the OR person in me and systems thinking person felt that, oh, there is something we can do here to model these different prejudices or the disadvantages that sometimes women find themselves in society. And this is where I thought we ought to do a project on this. So this is what got me started. And as a preamble here, there is also next month an event based on as a book club event on Caroline's book that Warren is running next month. So I don't want to steal much of what will happen there. I won't say much about the book, but I would say that it's a really interesting book for both men and women really to read and start becoming aware of the biases that exist in the society. So the problem with gender bias. So as you probably all know, we always are exposed to issues with the gender gap in the choices that women make, either in their choice of education, employment, or leadership. And this is not just about the choices they make, but also which opportunities are made to them, or the society or the norms of the society um, in a way make possible for them to at the right choices for them to make. So we notice, and this was quite a lot in the news recently, and the Our Society took a interest in the topic, for example, how girls do not choose to study STEM programs, or to take degrees in STEM, because they feel they're not good at that, and all the controversial media that was undertaken. So that really shows how this is still a topic that is quite relevant to our society, and the fact that women very often will make culturally driven choices in order to fit their family responsibilities, which I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. It's probably something that we all do. And another quite key characteristic is the phenomenon that we call the motherhood penalty, where we notice how women will undertake, on average, more unpaid work. And according to the Office for National Statistics, the data is relatively old, which is the last census that was done, but it shows that 26 hours of unpaid work per week are undertaken by women, as opposed to 16 hours by men. So clearly, there are internalized ideas. Women are conditioned to, or men are conditioned to behave differently, which are embedded in our cultures, in our upbringing, personal experiences, and the social norms that set sometimes the expectations of how women should behave, or what choices should they be making. So, for example, we probably have heard of the fact that men are conditioned to be more dominant and more assertive, which are characteristics of an agentic trait, versus women being conditioned to be exhibiting warmth and sympathy, which we would call a communal trait. However, when it comes to the case when women display agentic traits, they might be cautioned for that, or on the flip side of it, they might not be promoted because they display what we call more communal traits. So clearly, there is some element of bias in this. And I want to also set us the focus a little bit. What we're looking at here, there's two types of biases. We're talking about, there is a what we call first generation bias, where there is unfair treatment of women, or prejudice, which is done purposefully, and it's happens, for example, cases where women were not able to vote, which is what really is in our societies. We've made quite a lot of progress nowadays, and with the Equality Act of 2010, individuals are protected against any form of discrimination. But what we're really talking, or we are considering here, is what we call the second generation bias, which really refers to the unconscious or psychological defenses and beliefs that people might manifest, which may, even though they are unintentional, will adversely affect the progression of women. And this is called different, it has different terms, but we really realize that they are hidden, they are subtle and invisible, or covert, which really then means that they are difficult to identify and difficult to deal with them. So why should we bother about gender bias? Why should we be worried about it? What really happens and how this manifests itself is in the way that there is a gap that there's a lot of interest at the moment on the gap in salaries or social equity or social status, as well as the leadership roles undertaken by women. And we probably have heard the phenomenon of glass ceiling, where women are capped at to be promoted up to a certain level, or the glass cliff, the leaky pipeline, where fewer women progress in the more senior positions, or the sticky ladder, which means that which really talks about the deceleration of women's careers, especially when they reach at that mid-range management. So when talking to different people, I've come across to different ways of thinking about it. So there was a really nice, and she was a nice, really nice woman professor that I'd spoken a long while ago, and she said, well, a career gap for women, especially during the time where they are raising children, is fine, because you can catch up later. It's not a problem. So taking the time to spend with the family or to support the family is not a bad thing, in a sense. And then there is the other school of thought where women can and want to choose to be career oriented and not to let their family life to affect their career choices, equivalent to what their male counterparts would do. And clearly, I do appreciate that there are different ranges in between these two views, but I'd love to hear in the chat which school of thought do you think you um, um, abide by, or you believe in, and or perhaps what you've done in your own personal choices in your career and personal lives. So and I do appreciate that different people will make different choices, as well as the fact that at different stages in our lives we probably make different we have different views about this choice. So moving on now to talking a bit about the project itself. So what the aim of this project was, it was to look at, are women in OR and analytics professions affected by gender bias, especially knowing that it's a hidden and unconscious element? How can we identify it? And really the part of me where I really wanted us to understand or to highlight was, how can we identify those elements or factors that make gender bias affect or negatively affect women's careers, and particularly in the OR and analytics profession, and what are those elements that we can use them in our favor to tackle gender bias in a way that can help women promote their careers and be successful in them. So the approach we used in this case, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, we wanted to use systems thinking tools to help us to understand and explain this phenomena that women are normally faced with in the society, and how that affects their progression. And system dynamics, as we well know, we have a few very well-known and experts in system dynamics in the audience, is one of the methods that has been used quite a lot to explain social science theories. And it is really, the main element of it is to identify concepts and relationships between them in the form of a cause and effect relationship between the different social structures of behaviors that we see that are present in the society, in order to explain what is happening. There's there's a lot of, I would say, feminist theories out there, and a lot written about the gender gap and the choices of women and how women can get improve their career progression, and the pay gap or the leadership gap. In system dynamics specifically, we have found there isn't much work, but that we found a system dynamics model, for example, that was used to understand the low proportion of employed women in Indonesia. And what this model found was that even though a higher proportion of women are coming into the workforce, it would only it would take a long time for this situation to change, where the representation of women is much lower than that of men, unless there will be policies intentionally included to promote the employment of women. And then we found another really interesting study, which was done as part of a PhD thesis, which looks at particularly explaining the leadership gap between men and women. And what was interesting about this study is that they are looking at the career choices or the of the woman and husband and wife, in a sense, looking at both the workplace and the family, and the choices or gender inequity that happens in the marriage has an impact in the gender inequity that happens in the workplace. And they using a very simple, what I would call economic model, where the choices of whether the woman or how much the woman contributes to work or homework or to wage work is based on who earns more, who contributes more to the family. And also, they include in here the impact of social norms or expectations that are set out, where for women, even though they might, regardless of what their wage is or seniority at work, they are still expected to perform certain activities, because it is the role of the woman to take that kind of role. And in terms of looking at that as a form of how can we see it as an unconscious bias there exists, we might think of the example of the school normally calling the mom if their son or daughter has a problem during the school day. So looking at a little bit more at what Campbell did in her study, they had ran different scenarios, and the most interesting scenarios are those of what we call a transitional couple, where the husband who will be the more career oriented, whereas the woman will be both career and home oriented. The husband will contribute to the majority of the family's income, and it assumes then that the wife will undertake most of the domestic work time. And they introduce quite complex models in there, and what the models show is that at the end, looking at the seniority level of women and the man, the husband achieves a leadership position within their career span, whereas the women will just achieve just above seniority level that they were at the start of their marriage. And this is really a way of proving the feminist theory that was coming from Hawking, that indeed that's what they would expect to happen as a result of the woman taking on more of the domestic work, child caring, etc. However, they tested another scenario, which is called an egalitarian couple, which means that both couples are career oriented. And what happens in this case, while they might be contributing almost equally on family income, the wife's domestic work time will be slightly higher. And they saw what however, what that shows, the models show at the end, is that they both reach a leadership position, both the husband and the wife. And also there are though some what we would call considerations to make in the fact that while the woman focuses on their career or the wage work, it means that they have less time, or if any, for leisure. Or one other aspect that gets affected is sleep time, which probably resonates with quite a few women, which really means it tends to show that they lead a stressful lifestyle. And perhaps even though the model shows that women will be able to reach a leadership position, um, they may not choose to do so because they couldn't maintain that kind of lifestyle in their lives. Obviously, these are scenarios and models built based on average values, but I thought that was quite an interesting way of how you can use system dynamics to model this kind of relationships and see the outcomes. So now moving on to what we did in what this study did. So the student Foyin prepared a questionnaire survey, which she shared to OR Society, Warren, and Euros Wisdom Forum members to ask for their experiences of gender bias. And we use then these responses informed our understanding of the factors and associations with the gender bias that specifically women in the OR professions and analytics experience. And then this led to then developing an influence diagrams that will have to represent the factors that impact gender bias in a more systemic way. Briefly to mention the survey results, we had about 275 responses, and a big thank you here to all those who responded to the questionnaire, especially because it was in a very short period of time. There was a really good distinction between female and male respondents. So we had almost 50-50. The majority of the respondents were employed in full time, about 62%, with the others having different ranges of part-time employment. The majority were based in the UK, even though we had representation from Europe and North America, even from Asia and Africa. What was interesting about the group of people that responded was that 45% of the male and above the almost 63% of the female respondents had no children. Okay, in terms of the profession, we had again a very good representation from government, industry, and academia and research. So, and the same we could say about age distribution of respondents, where we have a range of younger people and older people, which is really good to hear a representation from all different ages. Now, looking a bit more at the survey outcomes and what they tell us. So this is more particularly related to how what level of career people are against the years of experience. And what we can see is that at entry level, we had more females at all different levels of experience, we could say. When we move on to mid-senior level, there are again more females, and especially the higher experience level of 10 to 15 years is much higher compared to males. Then moving on to more senior level, we see quite a big difference in how many that we now see more men in senior level positions compared to women with more than 15 years of experience. Referring now a little more to the educational status of women and men and their career level. The first graph at the top shows at the entry level we have more women with highest qualifications than men. Then when we move on to the second graph, which looks at mid-senior level, we can see that there is an equal proportion of men and females at the different high levels of education. And then at senior level, we see how men at senior level position, men have there's more men with highest degree qualifications than women, which really tends to suggest that men can use education or seem to be using it to be able to use education as a higher accelerator compared to women in their careers. There were also different elements that came through from the survey. So, for example, we noticed that 50% of the female respondents said that agreed that they were overlooked at least once for a task based on their gender, compared to only 17% of males. Almost 50% of female respondents also agreed that they had been assigned a task based solely on their gender, compared to almost 60% of males that had disagreed that they had experienced any bias, which tends to suggest that perhaps we are not as much aware of gender bias as it happens, or we couldn't pinpoint it. Then both male and female respondents agreed that there is a presence of cognitive bias and gender bias. However, they weren't able to fully associate it with their own experiences. In the case of men perhaps being propagators or women being victims of gender bias, which again tends to suggest the fact that maybe we're not as much aware of gender bias as we ought to be. On an interesting base, when we looked at the women and men that had mentorship and those that didn't have mentorship in their careers, we noticed that both men and women had similar proportions of progression in the different senior level positions as men, which is completely different at the picture when we look at the men and females without mentorship, which really suggests that mentorship helps quite a lot in closing the gender gap, either in leadership jobs, but also in the gender pay gap, which was really interesting to notice from the results and from what the respondents told us. Now I'll move on to show a picture of the system maps that were created as a result of the answers that came from the survey. And for those of you in the audience that probably know little about system dynamics and about influence diagrams and how they work, I'll just explain that, as I said earlier, in system dynamics, we identify relationships, a cause and effect relationship between two variables and then think about what effect does that have. So I'm going to take an example here with mentorship. The impact of mentorship as came out from the survey was that the more women get mentorship, the higher will be the promotion rate. So in that case, we call this a positive relationship. So there you will notice there's a plus in here. Then if we were to look at another case where, for example, there's the phenomenon that is called a queen bee phenomenon. The queen bee phenomenon, just to explain, is the situation where women might be harder than men, to women than men, for example, either because they have perceived expectations of how the job should be done by a woman, or just because they expect they just, without realizing, unconsciously, they might be harder on the quality of work. So the impact of the queen bee, for example, means that the more queen bees there are on the in an organization, the less the impact it will impact the perceived competence of women in the organization in a negative way. So then we assign a negative sign to this relationship. Now, there's a bit more to system dynamics diagrams, in the sense that what we're looking at what we call feedback loops that go round and close between them. And we count normally the number of positive relationships that there are between the variables, and based on whether they are odd or even, then we can identify what we call a reinforcing loop, which is really the one that improves or increases the impact on that particular feedback loop that we are looking at, or what we call a balancing loop, in the case when the number of negatives signs is odd. So I will pick only on a few, because I am aware that we don't have a lot of time, but I'll pick on the mentorship, because it was one of the elements that really seemed to be an important factor that affects the career progression of women, which said that we find that through mentorship, women can either increase their chances of being hired for OR jobs, as well as it affects their promotion rates. And that will in itself increase the number of women in OR and analytics jobs. Having more women will mean that the promotion rate of women will increase, and so will the number of women in leadership positions in OR. And having more women in leadership positions will mean that there will be more women available to mentor early career researchers. So clearly there we have a very positive and reinforcing, what we call reinforcing loop. One element that we also can see here is the impact of the queen bee, which again, the fact that being hard on women or not giving women many opportunities might mean that that will decelerate their promotion rates in their careers. Another interesting element here is about awareness of gender bias. So again, the more aware we are about the existence of gender bias, and this can extend also to organizations, the more dedicated support will be there available for women in the workplace, which will mean that women will be more successful at completing what we would consider as strategic level tasks. And that means that increases even more our awareness of the impact that gender bias can have in our societies and in our organizations. There's here another reinforcing loop, which really I relate that more to the idea of giving women opportunities, offering them more strategic tasks to undertake, and being successful, that will increase their perceived competence and then promotion rate as well. And finally, another balancing loop that we can see here is that of the impact, I would say, of what we call male perceived systems and internalized ideologies. Again, in this loop, it might not be very clear to everybody, but there's only one negative relationship here, which suggests that it's a balancing loop, and it's something to be aware of and to identify how someone could resolve it. So this is a view of the systems map developed, and here now on a positive note also about thinking a bit about the warrants role in improving the women's career chances. As here quite a positive feedback loop that shows how the fact that Warren disseminates favorable publicity will help to increase the enrollment of women in postgraduate, but also any courses related to OR will increase the application of women in OR posts, and that will mean that there will be more women coming into the OR professions. So to kind of wrap it up now, these are really our work in progress maps, if you like. They need more refining for further work. There's more factors can be added to understand women's careers and perhaps to be compared against the career pipeline of a man and a woman. And currently we've got a new MSc project running this summer, so we're hoping to look more in depth into these issues. What comes very clear from this project, and that we were quite happy to hear, was the fact that we making a conscious effort to recognize gender bias, to be aware of it, and calling it out is really the way to deal with it. So quite useful to have training and self-awareness and reflection at personal level, not just for women, but also for men. The catalyst role of mentorship in supporting career progression, as well as sponsorship in the way that giving women the opportunity to get those more strategic level jobs or tasks and to show that they are capable of doing them. Okay, I will stop here to see if there is any comments or anyone might want to add, make any suggestions. And like I said, it's all work in progress, so I'm really happy to hear from anyone or speak to me even after this session.
Thank you very much there, Angela. That was a very interesting talk. So I guess now it's time, I guess, for people to ask questions. So you can either pop them in the chat or raise your hand. So that's so either way is good. So first of all, it looks like we've got a question from Susan Howick. So it says, I noted education in the CLD. Is this education about gender bias or the female general education levels?
Yeah, in that particular one, it's more about the education, the level of education of women. The more educated they are, the more the chances of them being hired will be. So it doesn't refer to education about gender bias, which I think is probably something useful to add when exploring more of this. But thank you, Susan, for this.
So I had a question. So mentoring seemed like quite an important thing, and you've also involved in the mentoring side of Warren. So what are the actual, what are the mechanisms? So what does mentoring do? Well, how does that provide the benefits? What are the specific things that mentoring provides to people?
Yeah, mentoring is something that it's not very well known, I would say, or not many, especially women are not very aware of it, but it is a program that is quite useful to assign to, in a way. It can be offered at different levels. It can be at a more informal level. It can be at organizational level. There are normally programs where organizations now set up women or even men. Actually, what we notice is that men do tend to take mentoring in their careers. But it's about looking at opportunities and thinking about how one can progress their career or make the right decisions for them by speaking with perhaps a more senior person in their role and discussing options. But also it's quite helpful sometimes knowing people at that level who can then sponsor you into supporting you to get promoted. So there's different ways of setting up mentoring, but the interesting part is that it can be done differently in different organizations. In the past, we've been speaking to people from the government or our society, and I know we have some people here from GORS who are saying that there is a really organized program of setting mentoring. And what I think is important is to perhaps look out for doing this kind of activities, because it's quite useful.
Thank you. So do we have any some more questions for Antola?
Before everyone, where anyone goes, I'm happy to say something else if there isn't any questions.
So we have a question from Celine. So
Yeah.
women are often asked to take less strategic and therefore less rewarding in terms of promotions and research progress. So let's say, so to take on less strategic duties such as senior tutorship or taking visitors for dinner. Does this appear in the study? So yeah, taking on less strategic duties, does that appear in the study?
Yeah. So it's one of the so this was something that was asked in the sense of how do you get assigned this kind of the jobs in a way. But I think probably I would say that the question wasn't specifically about the fact that women get lower less strategic jobs or whatever. So it's something that we need to really refine a little bit more as a next step. However, I do appreciate, Celine, what you are saying, and the point that the maps are making is being aware of this and perhaps having a more directed approach to be looking out for the tasks that will show your qualities and abilities is probably the way forward, really, to how to deal with it in a more positive way, I would say. But that's a very good question. Right. So I wanted to say thank you very much to Karen as well for helping us set up and reach out to Warren members and OR members for administering the questionnaire. And thank you very much to all of you who responded to it. And that was last year in the summer. So but it wouldn't have been possible to complete this study if it wasn't for your responses. And as part of the sharing things between women and through Warren, I wanted also to mention a little bit about a job advert that is out at the moment for a research associate to work in developing business models and particularly simulations for the circular economy of small medical devices, which we'll be working on from September, October. So I wanted to make you aware, and please let anyone you know that might be interested in this job. This is a full-time fixed contract for 2 years. So please do mention this to anyone you know that might be interested to apply. Are there any other questions? I think there's something in the chat.
Yeah, what do we got here? So so what? So yeah, so that, I guess that was the question I was thinking as well. So what's the next? What would be the next plans for the taking on this, like following on with this work? So do you have another student or Like, is something going to, how is this going forward?
So this is a good question. So what our intention is, we've spoken with Brian a bit about this as well, and Brian is again involved, which is really nice to have him in on board with this. We want to explore a bit more the causal relationships, and perhaps think of different ways of identifying them, not necessarily through a questionnaire, but maybe look at clearly identifying the cause and effect relationships that exist that then can enlarge these maps. However, we're hoping to let the students imagination a bit run as well, and hoping to let them view this from a different perspective a little bit, and think about all the different factors that might affect. As you will see in the system maps that we got here, there's more factors that can be added to it, or you can see them at more level of detail. So for the time being, and for the reason that an MSc project runs for a short period of time, we will continue to focus on refining these maps, perhaps compare between them, and then come up with a more informed map later on. But for now, I'm hoping it will be something a similar study to this particular one. It's perhaps more one of those things that different people will come up with different maps, and let's see whether we can consolidate the views and pick on the ones that are really the key factors that affect the women's progression. Perhaps in the future, we probably would take this on to making it a bigger study, maybe a PhD, but we're taking one step at a time, Nalan.
Yeah, it seems like it can be quite a large project. So it could be good to spin this up into like a PhD project or something. Because there's so many different factors involved here.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think we've got time for one more question, if there's any more there. Okay, so it's probably I think time to say, well, thank you very much, Antoella, for this this wonderful talk. It was a great study there, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of the more research that's coming out of this. So yeah, I think it's something that we should really be looking into quite deeply. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So just to finish up, so I'll just share the screen there. So just we've got some more events coming up for Warren. So we're running primarily as online events, just to maintain our reach. And so the next one, and so this is Antoella has mentioned this. So we're going to have a lunchtime social session on the 21st of July. So it'll be a discussion about this book, Invisible Women. So I haven't read it yet myself, but I've heard great things about it. So it's something I'm looking forward to. And so please sign up to that, and it'll be great to see you come along. And even if you haven't read the book, it'd be great to even just learn about what's in that book. And then at OR64, so we're going to have a Warren panel discussion. So if you are going along to OR64, so that's going to be held in September. So please drop into this panel discussion. So we've got some wonderful speakers there. So it'd be great for you to come along to that. And then just to finish up, so if you're not a member of Warren, please join. So you've got the link there. It's great to have more people here, and we're as strong as our members. So the more we have, the stronger this group will be. And thank you very much, Antoella. It's great. That was a wonderful talk, and it was good to have Karen here supporting us. And the OR Society has been a great support to Warren. And again, thank you all for coming along. It's great to see you all here. If it's your first time, please come along again, and it's great to see many of the regular faces. So thank you very much, and And I hope you all have a good afternoon.
Lovely to see everyone. Bye-bye.